Okay, empty badges, empty. Oh, pseudo selector, empty. I hope you know about the empty pseudo selector. This one is a really good one. Welcome to another episode of From the Source. Today we are looking at Bootstrap, and I'm excited. There are a lot of interesting little things to talk about in here, and we're going to dive right in today because you don't need a new intro on what this show is. You've already been there. You watched episode 1. You know what to expect. It's Adam talking too fast and just scrolling through GitHub. And it's okay. Okay, I guess it's not that annoying. You're back for episode number 2, and we have some new fun stuff to find out today. I'm here. This is Twitter Bootstrap. We're at their GitHub repo. 135,000 stars. You can't beat that with a bat. And I'm just going to dive right into their Sass files because there is just so much to find in here. And their organization is just so approachable. I'm just going to hit their Sass folder and boom. I'm presented with something that feels very, very familiar to CSS files and a CSS folder architecture, and it's just going to let me dive right in. I'm not super interested today in their mix-ins and sort of the Sass functionality. I want to find like little moments in their CSS that are just fun for us to talk about. And so let's just kind of burn through these components and see what's interesting. We've got an alert. Position relative, so that means there's going to be children that are positioned absolutely inside of it, and that's kind of interesting. So it's an alert. Alerts are always inline. What would be maybe an icon or something. You could have a float. Maybe you would float it. Anyway, padding, alert padding Y and alert padding X. Okay, so this pattern I like. This pattern is where you're essentially saying our design system or our CSS architecture has no magic units. And a magical unit is whenever a developer is just like, yes, 1.25 rem is the padding here. And you're like, well, but you got a design comp and they've redlined it. Why are you picking something else? Anyway, these are magic units. These are units that were chosen in the moment, or they're units that they match other units throughout your system, but they're not properly labeled. These make things like refactoring really difficult, or they make consistency difficult if you have magic units. So it's nice about variables, and if you can use custom properties, use custom properties because they're amazing. But these help you avoid magic unit issues. So scale, refactoring, onboarding new people, ensuring a system, blah, blah, blah. It's really good to stash values into a variable. Okay, so we have margin bottom, and we have alert margin bottom. Okay, that's very specific. It sounds great. Border, alert border width. So these are all customizable too, right? So all these variables can be customized in a Bootstrap file. And so when you hit save and Bootstrap goes through all the Sass files and outputs a CSS file, this is your way to customize it, which is kind of cool. All right, we've got @include alert border radius. Okay, so everything is very specific. So that we have variables specific to this component, which makes sense because it's customizable. Interesting. Okay, alert heading, color inherit. Ah, nice. Headings for larger alerts. So if we have a big alert, and we have an alert heading, right? So that makes sense. A really large alert. We want to inherit the color. That's probably because, so we have headings color, and if you put a heading in an alert, it would probably initially get the headings color, but this is saying specifically color inherit so that you can tell the color of the heading to inherit from the alert, and the alert's probably going to set a color somewhere. Okay, that's interesting. Alert link, font weight. So we want to have matching font weight. So alerts probably need a little bit of, I don't know. That sounds very framework specific, but it's interesting. Dismissible alerts. Okay, so padding right? You have to make some room for the X that's going to float in the top right. Oh, we were wondering what could be floating. Here's the reason for position relative is we have an absolutely positioned close button that's in the top right, and that's why we pad the right, and that's why we put this up in the top right. Interesting with a little bit of padding. Cool. And this also inherits the colors. That way, in case the alert is blue or, an info alert or an error alert or all these different styled alerts, that the colors of these close buttons and the headings can all be within the family of that alert, which is very nice. Okay, and alternate styles. So this is where we're iterating and creating variants. Interesting. That is interesting. So variant, and the concept of like creating variants is also present in Tailwind, and I'm very interested in that. Okay, so that was alert. There wasn't anything especially interesting in there to note. Let's check out badge. We'll start small and then see where we go from here. All right. Requires one of the contextual color modifier classes for color and background color. That is a bit cryptic. I mean, I appreciate that it's there, but that's interesting. Maybe it has something to do with base class, or this is a base class. I don't know. We're just guessing. We're just trying to learn from the source. It's kind of all, it's whatever we can glean, right? Anyway, all right, so we got the badge. The badge is displayed inline block. Totally makes sense. Exactly what I expect. Again, no magic units. Do we see any magic units anywhere? No. Look at that. Oh, wait. We have a -1 pixel magic unit. Quick fix for badges and buttons. So if a badge is in a button, right? So we have a. Do we have any on here? No, no. Oh, this is kind of a badge and a button. Yeah, this is definitely a badge and a button. So the badge here is saying 321. Here, let me zoom in. Zoom. I mean, this isn't Bootstrap, but I'm just trying to understand the context here. So we have a badge and a button. So this is an icon button with a badge. There's a lot of action going on inside of this button. All right, so if we have a badge and a button, it needs to be top -1 pixel. So that's probably because the alignment that's happening here, we want the baseline of this badge number here to be the same baseline as here. Now we could use VisBug really quick to check to see if this is off by 1 as well, but it probably is. I think Bootstrap and GitHub have a lot in common. Okay, so if that's top -1, let's just keep burning through here. We got font size, so no magic units coming for font size, no magic font weights. It's kind of line height 1. Okay, this is a flag for me. This is a personal flag that this is like a no-no for me that I've learned over time, and it's interesting that I see it here in Bootstrap because maybe the fonts that they use don't have this issue, but from my experience, anytime I use line height 1, I eventually find a scenario where a descender is cut off. So a descender, because you don't know, is like you write a letter, like the letter, let me just switch to this. All right, so if I write a letter like an ascender is this part of the L, and if I do the letter Y, this is the descender. Oh, well, that's not helpful. I don't think you can see that at all. Okay, well, that's not useful. So anyway, the descenders always get cut off if you do line height 1. And so my solution is always line height 1.1, because the goal of this entire thing is always to sort of shrink wrap. You just want your text nodes to accurately take up the space of which the letters that are in them. This is an unfortunate reality of typography on the web, is there's usually some space above your capital letter T or your capital letter X, and then a little bit of space under your Y, which makes it really hard for you to make a color block that fits exactly to the text. Anyway, I wonder if this is what's happening here, is they did line height 1 because it's a badge. A badge needs to be shrink wrapped. That's why it's inline block. But then I wonder if this -1 pixel with the position relative with a badge inside of a button is because they have line height 1. They've shrink wrapped it a little too small, and now they need to offset that 1 pixel. And so for me, my perspective, if I did line height 1.1, I'm curious if the top 1 could go away. Because we would ultimately be pushing down probably 1 more pixel in a 1.1 scenario. Anyway, my advice to y'all is try to avoid line height 1. Try to always use line height 1.1 to ensure that you don't cut off descenders. And if you are using line height 1, just go look to see if you're cutting off any descenders. Look for the letter Y, look for the letter Q, and make sure that the bottom of them isn't just slightly cut off. Numerous times in code reviews, I've found that and made sure that we used 1.1 because descenders were in fact cut off. That was a really long rant about line height 1. Well, that's what we get for learning from the source though, right? I think that's the whole point. All right, text align center on an inline block badge. Okay. I'm unsure. Okay, whatever. I'm sure there's a good reason for that. White space no wrap. That means your badges could never go multi-line, so they're guaranteed to always kind of be very badge-like. It does kind of look weird if you have a badge that's multi-line. I don't know. I'm sure you can make it look fine, but it becomes not very badgy at that point. Badges need to be succinct. I don't know. That's an opinion. Vertical align baseline. Vertical align baseline on an inline block with text align center. I'd have to go recreate that to see what the value is. From what I can tell, there's got to be some use case. This is solving something, and I don't know what. That's very interesting. Okay, empty badges, empty. Oh, pseudo selector empty. I hope you know about the empty pseudo selector. This one is a really good one. Anytime, so in this particular case, and look at this, oh yeah, they're just using nice nested syntax, but and empty. So anytime a badge has been created, like div class badge, and there's no children, like let's say you didn't put any text in it, you didn't put any icons, there's no children, there's no, anyway, it's empty. It is literally empty. Well, you have a CSS pseudo selector called empty, and it allows you to do something to the element if there are no children. This is kind of like a parent selector. This is saying, given that I have no children, so it's almost like saying if there are no children, tell the parent to hide. So it's a very interesting relationship, but I find that when I'm making components, this is a very fun pseudo selector for me to say something like, hey, you're looking at a list, and here I might as well just be chatting at you because this is like, I'm ranting about it, but the pseudo selector empty, like let's say you have a list, and in JavaScript you're checking to say, is my list of friends dot length greater than 0, then render the list. If it's not greater than 0, then do something else. And so you can continue to do that in your JavaScript, but I want you to know that there is the opportunity to do the same thing in CSS. And it will be very dynamic, and you don't have to have any sort of logic around it. It'll just happen. And one of my favorite use cases for this is if my friends list is empty, I will say, if it's empty, make a pseudo element after. So I'll be appending content into the empty div node, and I'll put content inside of it that says you should add a friend. And as long as that messaging is really subtle and it's just text copy, I can get away with doing it all in CSS, and I don't have to have any JavaScript that's checking the length of anything. It's as soon as JavaScript puts like renders, the empty pseudo selector is no longer valid, and then the content renders and you don't see my messaging about adding friends. Now, if your JavaScript's loading and other things are happening, and let's say even whatever happens, your CSS is always there filling that with a nice message, so the user will never see a blank empty state. And so that's kind of what I'm pushing on here, is in terms of like UI and UX, the empty pseudo selector is a really great micro interaction hook for you to tell the user something because something's empty. I'm big about UI feedback. If there's a moment for you to tell the user why, take it. And in this case, an empty state is a perfect time for you to encourage someone to take an action. So it's not just for you to say error or something like that. This is a moment for you to encourage them to do something. So anyway, empty pseudo selector. I love it. From the source, gives us something to talk about. Let's continue on. Maybe there's like a juicier component we can look at, but I don't know. We're at 13 minutes, so we might need to cut it short here. Let's look at buttons. Buttons is kind of interesting because these always end up being lots more CSS than you think, and there's all these edge cases you don't think about. So let's see how Bootstrap is handling its button styles, and what can we learn from how they're making their buttons. How they're making their buttons. They're buttons! It's like, I don't know why. The buttons! It's fun. I'm going to keep saying it that way. Display inline block. Okay, I'm immediately, I like using inline flex, but maybe that's just the modern CSS mentality I have, and this is something that's been around far before flex, so they don't need it. They probably don't want it. In my opinion, I would be using inline flex. Okay, anyway, so we got font family, no magic units, font weight, no magic units, line height, no button line height. If button line height is line height 1, I'm going to go crazy. How do we find it? Let's find it. Let's go Sass. Let's find the variables. Variables. I'm just going to search in here. btn line. Line height base. Okay, so now we got to look up line height base. Gotta love abstraction, line height base. Let's go up our search results here. 1.5. I like it. That's healthy and safe. Okay, back to our Sass. Our button Sass. Just verifying that Adam's not annoyed. All right, we've got a color that's coming from the body color. Okay, that makes sense. Text aligned center. So another one where we have a shrink wrapped display type, but we're aligning the text in the center. This one's vertical aligned middle. Okay. Cursor. If Oh, interesting. That's cool. Okay, so cursor pointer, basically, depending on some conditions. User select none, so that means users can't do what I just did to this text right here. Background color transparent, that's fine. Border, fine. Include button size. Okay, so they are going to set a button size, so this makes me think they're going to set height width, which is nice. I do the same thing on my inline flex buttons. I like to set a height because there is a tab, there's like a suggested tab height for mobile and desktop. And with Flex, if you set the height, you can also do a vertical align center or align item center and justify content center, and you'll get center, and it's a really handy scenario. Now the potential trade-offs of setting something like height and width on a button is in case the button goes multi-line, you will have text being cut off. So by setting the height and width, you will gain a couple things. You're also taking your button from an intrinsic button to an extrinsic button. It was intrinsic all the way up because we were inline block, right? The whole size of the button was determined by the amount of text you're probably writing in the button, all the way up until we did this button size. When we set the button size, we essentially said, we would like to take control of the height and width of this button. It's no longer going to be determined by the content itself. So that's an intrinsic versus an extrinsic trade-off or strategy, and there's reasons to do both. I like to lean towards intrinsic because I kind of don't like fighting extrinsic bugs, but I get the value of extrinsic and when it can be really, really handy. So it's just interesting that they have that here. Over time, they've probably learned that maybe the extrinsic approach for them is much more scalable and approachable for people. I don't know. That'd be an interesting conversation. They're also importing some transitions. That's cool. We have hover effects. Okay, so I'm very interested in all of the different pseudo states that they have for their buttons. Let's check this out. The hover, not super surprising. They have a focus, and so they have a focus pseudo and a focus class. My guess is because mobile doesn't tend to do the focus pseudo selector very well, and if you've got some JavaScript that's watching to make sure if somebody's coming from mobile and they're doing like a long press, you can simulate the focus style. Also, what's nice about having a class is basically you can simulate the focus style in any different way that you want, and it puts you in a little bit more control. So you're using both, which is nice. Okay, then we have disabled. We have the disabled pseudo selector and the disabled class. So again, they're getting both. This is interesting. Disabled class comes first, so active can properly restyle. Does that mean we have active down below? Button. Ah, this is interesting. Oh, here's active. Okay. With a combination of some not selectors. Oh, this is getting crazy. Okay, so let's just go. So we have disabled. Disabled being a grayed out button that should have a cursor effect. See, I like buttons with cursor effects, and when you hover over disabled button, it shows you so. But they don't have that here, and they're using opacity, which is interesting. I also like to use solid colors. Okay, and not disabled. Not disabled, so they're double checking for both their methods of ways, or both their strategies that they can set something disabled. Disabled active and not disabled active class, pseudo class. They're putting a box shadow on there, and if it's focused, they're putting a box shadow on there. Interesting. Okay. Future proof, disabling of clicks on anchor links. So this is in case you have an anchor that's also a button, which was a really common thing to do. It's still common where links and buttons kind of get mixed up in your application. We have field set, we have pointer events none. Okay, that's interesting. That's probably fixing something I don't understand right now either. Here's where all the variants get made and we get pumped in. So this is our loop. It's going to output lots of variants. This is kind of nice, very succinct. And link buttons. So we have a whole special area here for link buttons. I'm slightly disappointed with how much we learned here. Maybe there's another buttons area, but okay, so for example, I expected to see buttons with icons. Well, here, let me just go back. Buttons with icons on the left, buttons with icons on the right, buttons with, maybe it's in the icons file. I don't know. I'd have to go dig in a little bit deeper, but for me, there's just so many different types of buttons. We even looked just a second ago at buttons that had a badge and an icon, right? So that was a a tab button. It was a button and a group of tabs. It was a button group, right? So we have a button group, we have a button, and in that button, we had an icon, we had the text of the button, and then we had a badge. The icon was on the left, the badge was on the right, and I anticipated to see in this code we were just looking at something that's like button.icon left dot badge right, or and all these different matrix of possibilities, and I didn't see it, and that's really interesting. Maybe that's something that I have to do as a user of these things, or I'm pretty sure there's those conveniences, so I gotta go look some more. But often my buttons file gets crazy, just because the amount of TLC that I have to spend in order to have a very good and high functioning button that's accessible and has all of the different pseudo states and can handle all the different icon sizing, and where we have small, medium, large, we have condensed and padded, and we have all these different variants. It just gets crazy. I expected to see more. I'm not disappointed that we didn't see more. I still think that there was cool stuff to learn in there. But anyway, that was the end of this episode. We're going to stop it right here. Maybe we'll do Bootstrap again because there was plenty to go through. And I liked what we talked about. We talked about some line height scenarios and how I like to use line height 1.1. We talked about how with buttons, I like to use inline flex with my buttons. And I also like to keep my buttons intrinsic, where the content decides the size of the button. So I like to leverage more about padding and alignment than I do in terms of like height and width and alignment. So cool, various things to think about, and I'm happy that the Bootstrap source was able to inspire us to talk about these things today. So I hope you have a nice rest of the week, and that concludes episode number 2 of From the Source. Take care, y'all. See ya.